The NFL is the ultimate what have you done for me lately league, and every player and team had expectations entering the 2023 NFL season. Some were, of course, higher than others, and some have played well beyond the expectations they had entering the year nearly 4 months ago, but others have not. Whether it was due to poor play, injuries, or a combination of both, there were several players and teams that more often than not had the short end of the stick in 2023. As you can see by the title of today's video, we will be discussing 4 of the biggest losers from the 2023 NFL season. When there is a title as bold as this is, it is important to note this is not me calling a whole team and the entire 53-man roster losers, as they are competing at the highest level for a reason, but more so they lost this season relative to what the expectations were for this team entering the year. There are several situations we are going to dive into and discuss what went wrong with each player and team this year. Now let's begin. The first team we are starting with in today's video is the Washington Commanders. Believe it or not, this team was 4-5 after the first week in November, and I don't want to say the playoffs were in sight by any means for them, but if they were able to pull out one of the games between the Seahawks or Giants, which were the ensuing games after they lost their 5th game, this team would have been in the hunt throughout late November and well into December. But that never came, and that win over the Patriots on November 5th will probably be their final win of 2023, as their final 2 games are against the 49ers and Cowboys. The 2023 Commanders weren't expected to win 12 games and make a run for a Super Bowl, but being 23rd in points per game and being dead last in points allowed per game is pretty disappointing for, well, anybody. They traded 2 former first-round picks in Montez Sweat and Chase Young midway through the year, which effectively ended their season, and they basically gave up and said, yep, we are tanking, we're embracing it, and that's that. However, over the last 8 games, they have allowed 28 or more points in 7 of those 8 games, and not surprisingly, when you allow that many points, you're not going to win many games, and the Commanders haven't. They went just 1-7 during this stretch, and when you look at this team is a very bad football team outside of a couple positions. They don't have many players on this team, and they haven't accidentally walked into a 4-11 record and a probable top 5 pick in the 2024 NFL Draft. The absolute best thing this team can do is to, in fact, lose out, as they currently have the number 3 overall pick, and with the amount of top-tier talent the 2024 class has, like a Marvin Harrison Jr. or an Olu Fashanu, or any of these guys, not mentioning the top 2 quarterbacks, of course, the best thing that can happen for Washington is to try and acquire as many first-round picks as they can because of where this team is. They're not an MHJ away from winning 9 games, and it's because of how bad this roster is. Not only is the 2023 Commanders team one of the biggest losers from the NFL season this year, but so is head coach Ron Rivera. During this stretch in which they lost to the Giants at home by double digits in a game where they would turn the ball over 6 times, or during a game in which they would give up 45 points to the Cowboys on Thanksgiving, or even the following Sunday in which they would give up 45 in a game to the Dolphins, you can tell a lot of this team is simply checked out, and Ron is too for that matter. I said this a few times in the weekly recaps, and I even tweeted it, but I don't know if I've ever seen a coach that's getting fired more than Ron Rivera is the Monday after the final game, which is referred to as Black Monday. They entered the year hoping Sam Howell would be the guy, and he wasn't, and in typical Commanders fashion, they tanked, but they didn't tank right because they're probably going to miss out on one of the top 2 quarterbacks in the upcoming draft. This team was underwhelming, they were disappointing, and losing 8 straight games to end the season very much summarizes the 2023 Washington Commanders. Next up is a player, and this is Justin Herbert of the Los Angeles Chargers. This could of course apply to the entire Chargers team, but we will focus on Herbert for today's video specifically. When Justin Herbert is healthy, he is one of the best quarterbacks in all of football, and unfortunately for Herbert, he has not been healthy over the past 2 years. Not only did he not finish the 2023 season, but he battled through several injuries during the 2022 season, and also had his top 2 receivers in Keenan Allen and Mike Williams miss time too. Entering 2023, the Chargers drafted a receiver in the 1st round in TCU's Quentin Johnston, and it looked like Herbert would more than have the help he needed to be successful for the 2023 season. But things don't always go the way teams plan, and the 2023 Chargers are a perfect example of this. Herbert had 3 300-yard passing games in the 13 games he played, which was much less than the 14 combined he had over the previous 2 years. Not only did he have 3 300-yard passing games, but they were against the Titans, who will miss the playoffs and have given up the 26th most passing yards in the NFL this year, the Vikings, who have given up the 18th most passing yards this year, and the Lions, who have given up the 23rd most passing yards in the NFL this year. There was naturally going to be a lot of attention of the Chargers entering the year, as they made a very controversial decision to bring back Brandon Staley after blowing a 27-point lead in the lone playoff game Staley would coach for the franchise, but Staley wasn't the lone person who disappointed. Whether this is fair or not, and I don't think it is, but quarterbacks are judged on their win-loss record, and the Chargers were 5-8 in 2023 when Herbert started for them. Some notable losses include the Cowboys and Chiefs games, in which the Chargers only put up 34 total points, and Herbert threw a combined 3 touchdowns and 3 interceptions in these 2 games. He had a passer rating of just 77.1, and Justin and the team not being able to play up to the better teams was a common theme this year. You could also argue that it's been a common theme throughout Herbert's career. This wasn't the only time Justin wouldn't play well against good teams either, as they would lose by double digits at home to Baltimore in one of the final games Herbert would play in 2023. Yes, Justin had his fair share of good games, like the Minnesota game for example, as he didn't miss many throws, or even the Detroit game as he would go on to throw for over 320 yards and 4 touchdowns, which should be enough for a win at any level, but there were also times where Herbert could have played better and ultimately did not. Not only that, but having a head coach everyone knew should have been fired and a receiver who disappointed in his rookie year relative to where he was drafted all contributes as to why Justin Herbert was one of the biggest losers in the 2023 NFL season. I like Justin a lot, but when you look at this year for him and everyone else on the roster, you can't help but think this wasn't a complete wasted year. A lot of the NFL would do anything to have a quarterback like Herbert on their roster, but the Chargers were fine with completely wasting a year of his prime by keeping Staley around. This year could have went a lot differently for LA, but ultimately it did not. Now, from Justin Herbert, we go to the opposite side of the country to discuss the New York Football Giants, and it's been pretty bad from the start. They started out 0-1 with a 40-0 loss to the Cowboys at home on Sunday Night Football, then had a come-from-behind win over the Cardinals in Week 2 to put them at 1-1, and that was pretty much the highlight of their season, maybe aside from a couple weeks of Tommy DeVito. They would go on to lose the next 4 games to put them at 1-5 through 6, with their second win of the year coming over the Commanders in Week 7 in a 14-7 win. Their third win would come nearly a month later, again over the Washington Commanders, in a game where Washington would turn the ball over 6 times. They would beat the Patriots and Packers to improve to 5-8 before falling to the Saints to drop to 5-9. The worst part about winning these games goes back to what we discussed with the Washington Commanders. They were in a good position at 2-8 to be able to get Drake May, the impressive quarterback from North Carolina, as I would be surprised if there's any Giants fans at the moment that think Daniel Jones is the legitimate answer, but they won 3 meaningless games against teams that will probably not make the playoffs. The reason we of course say probably not is one win was over the Packers, whereas the other 2 were against teams that have been eliminated in Washington and New England. One of the reasons they're in today's video is the disappointing play of several players on this team, and how bad this year has been for not just Daniel Jones, who of course had a season-ending injury against the Raiders in Week 9, but for several other players and coaches for that matter too. There have been seemingly countless Brian Daboll eruptions on the sideline, which is never a good look for a head coach, let alone a coach who won a playoff game last year and has taken a significantly big step back this year. To me, when Daboll erupts the way he has on the sideline earlier in the year, it shows that there's a lot going on behind the scenes, and I think there is a big difference between a player erupting with body language and the head coach of your football team. If a star player erupts and throws his helmet, or whatever the case may be, I don't want to say I'm fine with it because I still don't think it's good, but the head coach is supposed to be someone who is calm and cool under pressure, and we've seen the opposite of that from Daboll, and often. But Brian Daboll aside, there was the Evan Neal saga where he basically asked if all fans were burger flippers, and then there was a rant by a New York media guy who said if you see Evan Neal at the mall to boo his ass, or even at the DMV to quote boo his ass. And the best part about this team for this Giants 2023 roster has been Sexy Dexy, free agent acquisition Bobby Okereke, and second-year pass rusher Kayvon Thibodeau. But these guys don't make up for how bad it's been for this team at times. They have 11 games with 20 points scored or less and 10 games with 20 points allowed or more. Pretty much everything that can go wrong for the Giants this year has gone wrong, and they are one of the biggest losers from the 2023 NFL season. Out to Cincinnati for the next one, and this is more than a reaction to a 23-point loss to the Steelers in Week 16. This is about a couple of things, and it dates back to training camp with the Cincinnati Bengals. Joe Burrow had a calf injury, and a lot of Joe's game, or at least the highlight reel plays, are from improvising and making a play to get out of the pocket while simultaneously keeping his eyes downfield, only to find Jamar or T for a huge gain. But in the early parts of the year, it was clear. Joe Burrow was not the Joe Burrow we know him as. He had 2 passing touchdowns to 2 interceptions through 4 games, was completing just 57% of his passes, and had a passer rating of under 70. One of the reasons they're in today's video is you made Joe Burrow the highest paid quarterback on average annual value, which is great, good for Joe and his family, and ultimately the Bengals franchise for hitting on a quarterback they drafted number 1 overall less than 4 years ago. But if you knew there were these injury concerns during the year, which everyone did, by the way, it wasn't a secret, does 4 games really matter when you want him to play 100 or 150 more games for your franchise and ultimately go to the playoffs and win a Super Bowl? To me, yes, it would stink, but I would rather be safe with the guy we just invested nearly $300 million in. One thing I want to be clear is I'm not doing this with the benefit of hindsight and saying basically, oh well, we should have known the Jets would never live up to the hype, or the Bills would struggle for that matter too. Anyone can do that. But this was such a preventable thing from the start that the Bengals were always going to be fighting an uphill battle. And they were. Week 1 against the Browns was ugly, and in Week 2 they lost to the Ravens in a game where they didn't even put up 300 yards of offense. They had a stinker in Tennessee in Week 4 and quickly found themselves at 1-3 through 4 games, with Joe Burrow playing. All of the big 3 in Burrow, Chase, and Higgins have all missed time in 2023, and I get it. Injuries happen, especially at the most physically demanding level football has to offer. But winning a Super Bowl is incredibly difficult for any team, and I thought the Bengals put themselves behind the 8 ball from the start, and it snowballed from there. Not only did the big 3 get hurt, but star defensive tackle DJ Reader suffered a major season-ending injury in a late-season game against the Vikings, and I think that injury kind of summarizes the 2023 Bengals season. With how much they invested in Burrow this offseason, combined with the noted injury concerns there were entering the year, I can't help but think the Bengals wasted a year of prime Burrow, Chase, and T. Higgins. I hope you enjoyed today's video, and if you did, please like and subscribe, as only about 33% of people watching are subscribed, and it helps the channel tremendously. Until next time, please be safe and have a great day. Love you guys.